Untitled Charter in section 2.04.060 of the City Code. I hereby call a special meeting of the City Council to be held today, Thursday, January 27th, 2022 at 6 p.m. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilwoman Reno,
Present.
Councilwoman Renzulli,
Present.
Councilwoman Vargas, Councilwoman Jermaine,
Present.
Councilman Donegan,
Present.
Councilman Campiano,
Present.
Councilman Riley, Council Vice President Ferry,
Present.
Council President Paplaskas.
Present. And I just want to acknowledge a couple of excused absences this evening. First of all, our condolences goes out to Councilman Matthew Riley, whose uncle passed away, and there's a wake this evening, and to our council solicitor, Stephen Angel, whose mom passed away. So on behalf of the City Council, I'd like to send them both condolences on their loss. That being said, we just called the meeting to order. Tonight's agenda item is really one item. We'd like to hear from the public on what they want to us or the city to use the opera funds that have been given to us by the federal government. That's very important, and that's the reason for the meeting this evening. But before we get to that, I'd like to open up this meeting with a presentation from our City Council budget analyst, David DeMaio, kind of update the council and everyone on what's going on, what has been going on, and what to expect with use of the funds. So I will turn this part of the meeting over to City Council Budget Analyst DeMaio.
Thank you,
Sir. And Council Budget Analyst, thank you for all your work on this. Greatly appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President, and to the entire council. My goal tonight is to try to answer a lot of questions in a presentation that I put together that you'll see on the screen, and maybe help along with some of the questions that the public may have and along with what the council may have. It's a very comprehensive set of regulations. The American Rescue Plan Act, which went into effect, is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city of Cranston with its residents, business owners, and organizations. As a note, we need to take our time, review how we should and shouldn't spend these funds, work collectively together to get the most value out of the funds. With that being said, Tom, we can go to the first slide. So a little history on the funds. A lot of people have been thinking that the city funds are kind of for more than just the city, but this American Rescue Plan Act had direct funding, and it was tiered into other areas. So there was state funding that was received, there was city and town funding that was received, and there was school funding that was received. And the reason I wanted to break this out is because in some of the questions that have been out there and you've been hearing about, is the city going to use the money for schools? Is the city going to use the money for state roads? Is the city going to use the money for things? It's specific to each of the three areas. Again, the state, the city, and towns in the school funding. Tom, can we go to the next slide? To get a little bit more specific, the state of Rhode Island received $1.2 billion in opera funding. The city of Cranston will receive in total $42.6 million in opera funding. And as we did in the last meeting, $7.9 million of the funding has already been used for shortfalls in fiscal year ending budget June 30th, 2022. And I believe at our last meeting, Director Strom had reviewed how that was calculated and how it was reported to us for the shortfalls that we had due to the COVID pandemic. Also, what I don't think a lot of people are aware is the Cranston School Department has received OPER/Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which falls directly under the OPER regulations, separately from the city's allocation of $20.8 million. I bring this to go back one slide, please, Tom. I bring this to everybody's attention in a number value for a couple of reasons. The main reason is that the school system is going to have their own meetings and decide where the funding wants to go with reference to how they're going to elect to use it. I had a brief conversation with Mr. Balducci, and they're actually having meetings with educators and students to see where they feel the funds should be used based on what they can use it for. The reason I wanted to spell out the three areas is we have to be very cognizant of the fact of where we allocate our money, because we want to complement what the state may do, which will involve or affect residents, businesses, and organizations in the city of Cranston. We don't necessarily want to duplicate or overlap. We want to have availability to get the best and the most equities out of all the funding that's going to come out of it. And that would include the school system too. So we have to be, again, when we start to figure out how we're going to allocate, we want to pay attention to what's in the state budget so we can complement it or use what they're going to allow us to go after for the city of Cranston. Tom, next slide, please. So the things to keep in mind, prior to last week, the Treasury rules were not finalized and it was a moving target. But since then, the Treasury rules have been finalized, but they do not take effect until April 1st. And they're leaving it as a gray area. What they're saying is if you started to utilize the funds, you can go on the unfinalized rules that are in effect, or you can use the finalized rules that don't go into effect in April. And the thought process from the experts is that they're not going to criticize you if you use one or the other, because you might have a plan in place that's already with the unfinalized rules, and then you'll switch over April 1st of 2022 for the finalized rules. The Treasury is continuing to update with facts. It would not be a surprise to anybody involved if the rules change based on once the money is being allocated and spended. This is not CARES Act money or CRF money, so it is not necessarily or urgent to spend it immediately. We need to put programs in place, make sure that we can administer and meet the deadlines that they have instilled. Those deadlines are as follows. The deadline to appropriate the cost is December 31st of 2024. That means to allocate it to areas and items that you want to spend it on. The deadline to disperse the funds is December 31st of 2026. That would be at the time that, in essence, simplifying it, where you have to make the payments and disperse the money to the projects, the fundings, and the services that you want to adhere to. The Treasury compliance and reporting guidelines are not finalized and have been changing. I had a dialogue just today with Director Strom, and Director Strom informed me that they're consistently updating reports that they have to do on a quarterly basis. And there hasn't been a lot of activity because we haven't allocated anything, but they're following the requirements to get the reports into the government. Tom, next slide. So as a way to think of the process and other things to remember is, do not rush to spend the funds without a plan. Don't just think there's an idea and you want to plug a hole. Put a plan in place because you want to get most value out of the funding, because this isn't going to come along again. It's something that needs to be addressed. Do not fail to read and understand the guidelines, award terms and conditions of opera statutes, and the interim final rules and what the requirements are. You don't want to make a distribution and when you report it, find out that you have to pay it back to the government and it was used inappropriately or incorrectly. Do not make premature commitments. Something comes up, somebody has an idea, don't commit to it right away. Do your due diligence, read the regulations, make sure that the rules are in place and that you're following what they are. And again, do not take a risk that could require the city to pay back the funds. So don't try to attribute something that really is not covered under ARPA funds and use the funds, because you would be obligated to refund the money. And then the biggest thing is to remember through this whole ARPA funding is that the city is responsible for spending and reporting on ARPA. That means there's a lot of administrative work that goes along with this. It's not just writing a check to a project. So there's a lot of underlying reporting that'll take place once the decisions are made to appropriate this funding. Tom, next slide, please. So kind of in a nutshell, these are the overview areas of how you can use the ARPA/SLFRF funds, and that stands for State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. The first one is to respond to public health emergencies with respect to coronavirus disease 2019 or negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofit, or aid to impact industries such as tourism, travel, hospitality. Premium pay to co-workers performing essential work during COVID, public health emergencies. For provisions of government services on revenue loss, that's the one that the city of Cranston has allocated the 7.9 million to, and to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband. These are the subtitles or sub areas of what everything will fall under. This is where all the funds have to be applied and have to be assessed to the areas that fall under these requirements. These areas can be broader, which will go on to a few more slides, but this is kind of the consensus areas of where the funds can be allocated. Tom, next slide, please. So what they offered was a list of, in each of the categories, to simplify what you may want to apply these funds to. So in public health, here are a list of them. And I think some of these are with some of the initial things that have been, money's been expended for, whether it's the vaccinations, testing, contact tracing, anything that the city incurs as an expense in any of these areas, the money can be used for. Now, one thing I failed to say at the beginning, these funds are appropriated to prepare the city of Cranston for future issues or future pandemics. It's to get them prepared so we're ready when this happens again. And these are the areas that the U.S. Treasury and the government feel need to be improved on most cities and towns and school departments. These are the areas. It's the having the supplies, the PPE, the medical expenses, capital investment in areas, physical plants, public facilities, so you can house the items. Having plans in place for public emergency, the payroll costs that go along with it. So it allows you to ramp up and employ people to get the work done. Obviously, mental health services, substance abuse, and other public health safety, because I think we're all aware of what it took to ramp up, to get the testing done, to get the messages out to the people, and to control the pandemic to the best of our ability in the city of Cranston. And that's for all ages, from our seniors right down to our elementary students. Tom, next slide. This falls under the negative impact area, and these are the programs that money can be assessed for to help. As you are aware, the state also has some rent and mortgage relief that's going on now, but also at the city level, this could be in effect. So you have, household assistance, you got food programs, rent, mortgage, and utility aid, cash transfers, internet access, household eviction prevention, unemployment benefits, job training, small business economic assistance, aid to nonprofit, aid to tourism, travel, hospitality, and other impacted industries, and rehiring in the public staff. Next slide, Tom. The premium pay is to essential workers. Examples of essential workers, nursing home, people in the city that may have administered COVID shots or tests where they're working longer hours. And then there's also the offer to the outside services, nursing homes and congregate places where you could give them grants to entice employees to work longer, give them a little bit more pay because obviously they're working extra hours. There's a calculation, and we can get into that a little bit more. The next slide, please. And then the infrastructure. So, it's the programs that are listed here. It's clean water, sewer treatment, stormwater, energy conservation, water treatment, broadband upgrades, and that will work into a lot of different projects. These are just the overview on, where you want to add and where the need is. And the next slide, please. So these are a list of project ideas, but before we go into that, I wanted to step back because I gave you a lot of information. And is there any of the council members who might have a specific question prior to getting into some of the areas and what some other people are doing? Just maybe a question on numbers or how do you go about picking what it is? I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. I'm kind of feeding you a lot of information all at once. So to take a few minutes and just see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. DeMayo. At this point, do any council members have any questions for Mr. DeMayo? Councilmember Jermaine?
Thank you, Council President. Thank you so much, Mr. DeMayo, for this presentation. My question is, I don't know, I didn't read it, but you more capable to give me an idea. Is that the park and recreation, is that something we cannot consider?
There's areas for, and on the bottom, there's areas for capital investment in public areas.
Mhm.
It's just, so one suggestion to make is, I think the way that we have to approach this initially is, if somebody has a suggestion on something that they feel should be or could be covered, we take what the project or the idea is and see if it fits into one of the requirements. For example, there's actually a calculation on lost revenue, and replacement of lost revenue can be used for, hold on one second, I'll give you a little bit more of a specific. So you can use it, lost revenue, on government services, and under the government service section of the code. Now, I had sent you this little booklet as a synopsis to read, but there's construction of schools and hospital, road buildings and maintenance, health services, governmental administration, environmental remediation. There are areas to do the improvements based on the calculation of the funds. So a little bit of this is having a project that you think fits under this because it's for public health, and then making sure that the suggestion will fall into that category. I believe there is capital investment or improvements for parks and recreation, but it'd have to be based on the specific project.
Is that the way you frame the language that will be helpful, or is you have really specific project that you have to do?
So to make it simplistic, if we decided to allocate money to broadband, it would be infrastructure so everybody had broadband service. So that falls right under the requirement. If we were to say that it was a public health issue and we needed to have more open space, as an example, more open space or more facilities so we could have more outdoor areas, that might be the way to frame it. So without being specific and out reading a little bit of the regulations. So to each council member, I sent the slideshow, a overview financial rules, and a full copy. The final rules are 447 pages. So I've read through them once, but until we get to the point where we have a specific project or a suggestion, then we can ratify that it'll work under the funding.
Thank you. I asked this question because, as you mentioned, this is a one lifetime opportunity. And since I was elected, I have received so many complaints, so many demands for Ward 2, sewer problem, Parkins recreation. We have Budlong pool, that is an issue, and we know money is an issue. So I wanted really to know, we have paving roads. I have residents that calling, email, they are complaining about 10 years. They have 50 years road that have not been paved. So there is so much needs in Ward 2. So I think in this opportunity, if we can find the right language to make sure what to benefit of this opportunity, that's something that will be more than wonderful. So that's why I asked the question.
Yes, and the one common ground in through, I did a federal seminar, I read through the regs. The one common ground that it seems that all people are trying to suggest or realize, because it's a once in a lifetime event, you have to be cognizant not to put something in place that's funded in the money once it runs out. There's no other way to establish that program or that service. The goal, it seems to be, is infrastructure upgrades that'll last longer and will produce some additional revenues or savings for things that we would have had a bond for down the line, which would increase our budget to continue with the other programs. You know, any of the things that we need to improve that fall under this would normally be instituted or financed by floating a bond. And by not having to float the bond and having the funding to pay for it, we don't have to service the debt. So that means that the budget is not going to have to pay the finance charges, the interest to service the debt over 20 years, but the project gets completed. So that money that would have normally been spent on that can be allocated for other important projects.
Thank you so much for the clarification. That's because I think in my part, I will propose what I would like to see. Those roads that haven't paved, we have a sewer problem in Clarence, and residents have been complaining for years. And from what I heard when I approached the administration, it's a money. And I think that's something that can address with this money. And I'm happy that you clarify that for me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Jermaine. Councilmember Marino.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. DeMaio, for this presentation tonight. I had a question. Hopefully we will allocate everything and spend everything by the deadlines. My question is, if, let's say, we don't allocate every, penny of what we receive, do we know what the expectation is? Does the federal government request it back? Can we keep it in an interest-bearing account? I'm just curious if that's even come up yet.
I don't have an answer. I did some research because some of the questions that have arisen through this, for example, you want to do just, let's say, a sewer project in an area that needs to be revamped. So we all know that to get the sewer project done, there's a process. So you need the plans, you need to put it out to RFP, you've got to get the pricing, you've got to award it, and then you've got to get the materials. So if it's a major project, the project could go for 3 years, which would put us, a lot closer to that year end. So, in my professional estimate, or I think there probably will be some moving adjustments. And we don't know, So it's
Right,
just one of
okay.
those things, just like the regulations weren't finalized. But so if Director Strom's on also, we had a little bit of a discussion. So I did some research and I did not get an answer yet. I've called Washington to the Treasury to try to get an answer. So they use two words. Tom, if you go back to the slide that has the allocation dates, I think it's slide right there. So if you read, this comes right off of what they're saying. So you've got a deadline to appropriate costs and a deadline to disperse funds. So Director Strom and I had a discussion. So now my concern and his concern also was, we decide to do a major construction project or a road project, and it's multi-year project, and we got to adhere to the dispersed definition.
Mhm.
So they're not done with the job. They've got 6 more months. We have to pay them in advance and the job's not complete. Can we put it in a restricted fund? These are the questions that we're not sure of, because I would have to believe that some of these projects aren't
Right.
going to be weekend projects and things are going to get done. I mean, part of what you can do is ventilation systems in buildings. I've got to assume to do a whole new ventilation system in City Hall, for example, is not going to be something that's going to be done quickly, if that's a project. Secondly, when we went over this, we were wondering if we appropriated it and distributed it into another entity or organization, could they do the processing of it after, and would that solve it? These are some questions that I really don't have high answers for. Bob, if you want to offer your opinion.
Yeah, thanks, David. By the way, I think your presentation was very good based on my knowledge of these opera funds. To answer Councilwoman Marino, the way it stands right now, and I believe you're aware that this has been changing with time, some of the restrictions, some of the requirements. But initially, my understanding is you need to appropriate or structure costs for certain projects by 12/31/24. And the sooner that's done, the better, because my understanding to date is that it needs to be dispersed by 12/31/2026. Now, as this thing takes a life of its own, and it may change again, that you may designate money for the project, but in fact, if the project, because of the technicality of it or the issues that are involved in doing this and getting it done, it may take longer than that period of time. But right now, my understanding is that it has to be designated by 2024 and dispersed and completed by 2026.
All right, I appreciate it. Yeah, because that's my concern. Unfortunately, in New England, we're notorious for projects infrastructure-wise taking longer than expected. Then that's compounded by, at least right now, until things turn around, just supplies are in short supply, trying to get things timely. It seems like no matter what it is. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Can I just say one other thing too? We originally, there was a formula that started out at calculating revenue loss at 4.1%.
Yeah.
That in the last 3 to 4 months, that's changed now to 5.2%. So in fact, there's more money available that can be through the revenue loss cycle because of the change. And that's something that's just been done recently. And my point is that other things could change also that would be more advantageous to us, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would be under the assumption that based on the supply chain that everybody's going through, I would have to assume that this will be reassessed at some point in time. You know, if obviously the monies can't be, and it's a common denominator across all cities and towns and states, that they can't disperse the money fast enough. So Tom, if we go to the last slide, please. Prior to that, there are a few things to be aware of that the money can't be used for. Obviously, it can't be used to offset reduction in net tax revenue as a result of a tax increase. So in essence, we couldn't raise taxes and fill the hole with the opera funds. You can't make contributions to pension plans to reduce the accruals. And you can't replenish a rainy day fund or service any debt obligations with it. So I just wanted to put that out there, that there are some things that it cannot be used for. The last slide. This is by no means a commitment of any of the funds. This is just what's out there and what people have been suggesting or trying to allocate their fundings for. I wanted to at least get some of this out there, so if people either didn't think it could be used for an item or unaware it could be used for an item, that's why I put these up here. Obviously, every city and town is unique, and Cranston, obviously being the second largest, may have other items that it could be used for other than what's here. But this just gives you an overview, you know, that adheres clean up wastewater holdings, community development, you know, lead water distribution lines, replacement of utility meters so they're more consumption savvy, revenue replacement, mental health. I mean, these are just kind of a broad scope of what the money can be allocated for. And it falls under the demographics of what the U.S. Treasury is allowing. You know, before any additional questions, we got to understand that, again, I'll say it one more time, these funds are being allocated to prepare cities and towns for the next time this happens. That's the reason this was done. So when it happens again, we can get out on top of it faster than sitting back and waiting to see what we're going to do. Any additional questions?
Thank you, Mr. DeMayo. Any additional questions from council members? Just raise your hand so I can see you. All right, I do not see any additional questions from council members. Director Strom, do you have anything to add to this presentation?
Well, as I stated before, I think the summary that was presented is most knowledgeable to the constituents of the city of Cranston. It'll help if they have any questions or some of the suggestions they may have. I know the administration was looking at things of relating to recreation, hospitality, and things of that nature, along with roads and, you know, infrastructure, pump stations for sewer, various things that I think needs to be reviewed and, based on the funding, be prioritized. Right now, the city has over $21 million, of which we've generated about 20,000 or so in interest. We haven't spent or used any of those funds to date. We're going to be receiving more money this year, I believe in May and August again, to bring that total up to 42 million. We had to report in August to the feds to the Treasury. We also just reported this week, because the due date was January 31st, to the Treasury. and there'll be other dates that we'll have to report as well. So right now, we're right up to date, and we are having discussions with the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns for some of their input, not to how to spend the money, but what is eligible and in what direction we should consider to spend the money. So that's pretty much an update from me. And I'm happy at any time to discuss anything with the council and administration going forward.
Director Strong, thank you very much. Director DeMaio, do you have something to add?
Just on one other note that we didn't bring up, the council is actually putting together a survey to also reach out to business owners and residents other than just this town hall meeting, just to have other avenues, because the part of the requirement is to engage the community to see what their opinion on what the funding should be used for. And we are meeting those requirements.
Also, to add to that too, Council President, as you know, we have an RFP out for polling, and that was brought forth by a resolution on Monday evening that was approved, and we'll be going forward on that, and after we do our evaluation, we'll be coming before you to let you know what the cost is for something like that. So I think the city's trying to do much of an outreach as possible to get input from the constituents, hopefully to help decide what we feel, or what they feel, I should say, or what the city feels is the most important issues to take care of at this time with this kind of money that is, as it's been stated, once in a lifetime.
Thank you very much, Director Strom. Councilmember Donegan, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Council President. No question. At this time, I just want to say thank you to. It looks like there's quite a turnout from members of the community this evening. I just want to say thank you to all of them for taking the time to come and share their ideas and perspectives with us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Councilmember Donegan. Just real quick again, thank you, Director Strom. Thank you, Budget Analyst DeMaio, and thank you, Tom, for all working together on this presentation and getting this done for us this evening. It was very helpful and good. That being said, the real purpose of this meeting today is to hear from the residents of the city. I see we have over 60 participants in the room. So what I'm going to ask tonight, so we give everybody an opportunity to talk, is to try and limit your comments to 4 minutes. When we get to 4 minutes, if you're still talking, I'm going to jump in politely and just remind you that you're at your 4 minutes, so that way you can wrap it up. Really like to try and stick to that so we give everybody the opportunity to talk. If you have any questions, ask your question. I'd ask that Mr. DeMaio write the question down, and we'll try to get you an answer for the next council meeting on this topic item, which will be February 10th at 6 p.m. Just with the amount of people here, we don't have time to go back on a question and answer, but if you have a question, ask it, and we'll try to get you an answer for that next council meeting on this topic. Before I open up public comment, Councilmember Vargas.
Yes, thank you, Council President. Just a quick question. On the interest that we would be earning on that ARP funds, does that money that is earned have to then be utilized for the ARPA, under the ARPA guidelines, or is there no restriction under any of the interest that we're making out of those funds? So if we have the 20 somewhat million that has come in, or so estimated that has come in already, we're earning, X amount of, thousands of dollars of interest. What can we do with that interest? Does it have to be used with an ARPA project, or can the city actually utilize that for anything unrelated to that?
The interest that we're earning on that ARPA money, which happens to be I have it in front of me. It's so far $27,000. It's in a very conservative investment rate because we want to make sure there's no chance of any shortfall or loss. That money is all pooled together with the monies that we receive from the feds, and our goal or plan is to use that money for ARP projects. It does not go into the interest of the city's general fund. It's restricted with the ARPA funds.
Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to make sure. But I do see Mr. DeMayo, our city auditor's hand up on there as well. Council President, if he can chime in.
Mr. DeMayo?
Yeah, and Director Strom, just to ratify, obviously, we're probably expending money in our current budget that probably has some allocation to the opera funds, whether there's supplies and whatnot, that'll be tracked also, and there'll be some reimbursement there. I mean, I'm assuming we're trying to do the bigger projects, but I'm assuming day to day, there's always something we're spending, funds we're spending currently that probably would allocate to the opera funding.
That is correct. However, we have not spent or reimbursed any line item to date.
Correct. That's what I was trying to just establish is that there are expenses we're incurring that can be reimbursed in our current operating budget, but it's one of those things where we're waiting to see what avenue we want to take and where we financially stand. Thank you, Director Strom.
Thank you to both.
Thank you. I see no other comments from council members, so I really like to get to public comment and give everybody an opportunity to speak. So if you are on the phone, press *9 to raise your hand. If you are on Zoom and would like to participate, raise your hand. Just stick around in the queue. Tom's going to go one by one and bring you in. Just going to need your name, address, and association. If you're representing a nonprofit, a political action committee, or work for a vendor that wants to try to get opera funds, just say who you're with if you're representing somebody. And we'll go to 4 minutes apiece. Mr. Lima, bring in the first person, please.
Claire Stottmuller.
Hello, good evening. I am Claire Stottmuller of 963 7 Mile Road, and I am co-founder of 5G Free Rhode Island. And I will preface my prepared remarks by saying that a lot of them are relevant to Mr. DeMayo's comments, and I will be happy to provide to all of you how what I'm about to say now is relevant with, of course, expansion on those points with statistics, etc. As Cranston decides how to spend the ARPA money on broadband internet, it is absolutely critical for public safety and for economic viability that this broadband be FTTP, fiber to the premises, and not wireless. It is also the only choice in order for elected officials to uphold their oath of office to protect our rights guaranteed by the constitutions of the United States and of Rhode Island. My colleague later will outline the comparative superiority of fiber to the premises, with which Rhode Island is especially well equipped, having already 48 strands that need only the last mile. The only things that wireless can do that fiber cannot is make money for those invested in it, emit polluting emissions, and surveil. The telecommunications industry uses the word deploy rather than install because 5G microwave radiation is a military weapon. It enables the social credit score through the Internet of Bodies while bombarding your body 24/7 with pulsed microwave radiation at 60 gigahertz. This surveillance can and will record things that are supposed to be private, such as your increased heart rate during the night or your increased cholesterol. This violates HIPAA laws and Section 6 of Article 1 of Rhode Island's Constitution, quote, "The right of the people to be secure in their persons against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated," unquote. Deploying 5G's SWTFs, so-called small wireless transmission facilities, is also discriminatory, as electromagnetic sensitivity is an illness recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those who are not already diagnosed with EMS have the right to avert radiation sickness instead of waiting to redress it once injured. In Pittsfield, Massachusetts, people who became EMF refugees unable to live in their own homes are in litigation against the zoning board members who allowed the offending cell tower. We at 5G Free Rhode Island are trying to prevent a disaster. Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re will not insure the telecommunications industry because they recognize that this is another asbestos, cigarette, and lead disaster in the making. Who will hold the liability? Elected officials can no longer claim plausible deniability. Will the city of Cranston and our elected officials be held liable when class action lawsuits are brought? Cranston will also lose tax revenue because properties with so-called small cell antennas on utility poles in front of their homes lose value, according to real estate data collected nationally. Using fiber averts these public safety and liability hazards. It also generates money for a city, as demonstrated by Chattanooga, Tennessee. Leasing the fiber to the internet service providers creates a recurring revenue stream. FTTP is future-proof. Mr. DeMaio brought that up before, what's going to happen later when the money is run out. This means future-proof. FTTP fiber to the premises will last for 40 to 50 years, while wireless will need to be updated in 4 or 5 years, creating a future expense for which Uncle Sam might not be paying. In closing, Magda Havas, PhD, professor at Trent University of the Environment, said,
Claire, we're at 4 minutes. Just want to.
I'm closing, thank you. COVID-19 cases per million are 95% higher, and COVID-19 deaths per million are 126% higher in states with 5G microwave radiation. As I said, I will be sending the footnotes to all of this and the statistics, because they certainly address Mr. DeMaio's points in how to spend the ARPA money. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire.
Jose Nunez.
Hi, Mr. Nunez. The name and address for the record, and the floor is yours. Just need to unmute, Mr. Nunez.
Sorry about that. Hi, my name is Jose Nunez. I live at 151 Payne Avenue in Cranston. And just want to know, so you said would any can use any money, let's say, to put, let's say, like solar panels on houses or stuff like that?
Mr. Nunez, I'm not sure if you have any questions. I would just pose them. I'm asking everybody just to ask your question tonight. We get you an answer by the meeting of February 10th, just so we can give everybody an opportunity to speak. But the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
All right. So I was right. So as a homeowner, I was wondering, would people be able or the city be able to get the money, let's say, for putting solar panels on homes? Hello?
Mr. Nunez, I can hear you. I don't know. We're not going to be able to get answers like that.
Okay.
Tonight, but we'll get you an answer for the next meeting. Okay, on February 10th.
All right. So that, and if not, my other two things would be the trash collection and sidewalks. So those would be my other two concerns.
Very well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Yep. Thank you.
Sheila Rosinger.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Sheila Ressiger. I live at 50 Malvern Avenue in Cranston, and Edgewood has been my home for 43 years. Along with Claire Statmuller, whom you just heard from, I'm a co-founder of 5G Free Rhode Island. I'm particularly focused on how the funds will be utilized in support of broadband infrastructure, that is, for reliable and affordable broadband access. Gaps in coverage and unaffordable access are serious problems. What needs to be understood is that the superior way for households and businesses to connect to the internet is via wired connections, fiber to the premises, as Claire mentioned, and not wireless connections such as those coming from so-called small cell antennas on utility light poles outside people's homes. Wired connections are faster than wireless, they're reliable, don't go down in a power outage, much less vulnerable to hacking, do not enable surveillance, are energy efficient, and do not emit harmful radiation. In August of 2020, our group, 5G Free Rhode Island, presented an hour-long explanation of the harms of wireless to the Cranston City Council. We discussed radio frequency microwave radiation that emanates from cell phones, routers, laptops, cell towers, baby monitors, and the small cells for 5G. At that time, many were skeptical that this is a real issue or that the City Council could do anything about it. Since that time, there have been two significant events that should persuade you to reconsider the City Council's role in preserving a safe environment for Cranstonians. First is the report from New Hampshire published in November 2020 called The Environmental and Health Effects of Evolving 5G Technology. They have 15 recommendations for mitigating risk. Second is the landmark case recently decided against the FCC on August 13, 2021, for failing to revise their outdated 1996 safety guidelines for radio frequency emissions. Just think how this radiation is ubiquitous now since 1996, and they refuse to update their guidelines. The court ruled that this decision by the FCC was, quote, arbitrary and capricious, unquote, and also ruled that the FCC failed to address impacts of long-term exposure, impacts to children, people injured by wireless radiation, impacts to wildlife, and impacts to the developing brain and reproduction. This is a golden opportunity to spend the ARPA money wisely on wired connections, fiber to the premises, rather than wireless. And I didn't plan to speak on this, but in looking at the listing under project ideas that Mr. DeMeo presented to us, one of the items was replacement of utility meter system with AMI system for consumption management and cost control. And I want to point out that these smart meters have caused numerous problems with people's health, and there have been lawsuits. And this is something, I mean, I don't have it at my fingertips now to discuss, but I will look up more information. These smart meters are detrimental to people's health, and you can't be fooled by thinking that it's going to be a cost control system, you really have to look into what the health effects of these smart meters are. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Harrison Tuttle.
Mr. Tuttle, good evening. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, everybody. My name's Harrison Tuttle, 131 Belmont Road. I am the executive director for Black Lives Matter, Rhode Island Political Action Committee. So I'll be speaking on a couple of things regarding racial equity, but also speaking as a resident of Cranston. I want to first off start by saying that here in Cranston and all throughout the state, we have a massive housing crisis. A crisis that specifically in Cranston has left 48% of residents cost burdened, over 70 kids identified as homeless. Our city can't have this. And when we have a situation in which, you know, we have seen our state not develop low to affordable housing in over a decade, you know, as we mentioned, and as everyone knows in the city council, this is a once in a generation opportunity. And we cannot fail as a city to not only the constituents that all of y'all serve, but also as individuals to have people out on the street homeless. So I look forward to seeing the proposed plan that you all have, will come up with. But I really want to stress the need that, a majority of these funds need to go to affordable housing. And no matter where you lean politically, I think everyone understands that, this housing crisis that we have, needs to end and needs to be dealt with in a way that is equitable and meets the demands that we have. I also want to mention a couple of other things. Obviously, we know that, during this pandemic, the people that have been most affected by the pandemic have been people of color. I really want to stress that we center Black and brown folks and people of color when we talk about spending this ARPA fund wisely, and specifically invest in mental health and being able to find different ways to be able to meet the needs that people have, while also providing, improved way to improve public safety. And some of that may look like being able to fund alternative response teams that provide mental and behavioral health support opposed to, police, but really take a look at being able to address not only mental health outside of schools, but inside of schools, while also being able to address the critical need of housing. And so I'll be asking a couple of questions for the city council to answer. And I really do appreciate the time, and that is all I have today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tuttle.
Susan Kelly.
Good evening, Susan. The floor is yours. Just need your name and address for the record. And you need to mute.
Yes, thank you. My name is Susan Kelly. I am at 199 Jordan Avenue in Cranston. And I don't have prepared speech here, but it did seem to me from what Mr. DeMaio was saying that we have choices between long-term projects such as replacing sewers or replacing lines for lead in the water, and that we have, I hope, the opportunity for short-term projects such as helping people who are on the edge of being evicted or people who are on the edge of food insecurity. It would seem to me that making decisions about helping people immediately who have really suffered during this pandemic and aren't getting much relief, that helping them immediately and not waiting until, I don't know, 2024 or 2025 to actually distribute funds to people who are in deep need is something that should be a priority, it seems to me. And secondly, I would like to agree with Mr. Tuttle that, we have people who are in danger of homelessness or who are homeless. And I would certainly like to see an investment in low income housing, of course, but in trying everything we can to eliminate that particular problem in this very nice city that just shouldn't have this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Amy Renone.
Good evening, Amy. Welcome. Name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Amy Renone. I live at 67 Valley Street in Cranston. Been a resident of the Mechanicat neighborhood for about 20 years. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and for the presentation earlier on the ARPA funds. One of the things that was discussed was the importance of helping prepare for this kind of a event in the future. One of the things that I think the pandemic has made very clear is the importance of safe and affordable housing for folks to be able to shelter in place and to be able to work remotely and to have their kids schooling remotely. Unfortunately, as you've heard from a number of the other speakers so far in Rhode Island, too many people don't have access to affordable housing. Their housing is overcrowded. It may be unsafe. Cranston in particular, over quite a period of time now, has not done enough to create affordable housing and to ensure that the folks who live in Cranston can afford the housing that they're in. I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for the city to really put some of these resources towards those issues. Thankfully, Treasury in its latest guidance explicitly made affordable housing, production of affordable housing, preservation of affordable housing, repair of housing for low-income individuals, explicitly authorized uses for these funds. So there's no question about this being an eligible use of funds. I think it's a great opportunity to hire a consultant to help the city identify areas that could be used as affordable housing and what, if any, changes to ordinances might be needed to make that possible and to help implement those changes. I think it's a great opportunity to put some resources into the rehabilitation of our extremely old housing stock to make it safer over the long term for the folks who live in those units. It's a great opportunity to address lead in housing, lead in the pipes as well as in the units themselves. There's a lot of areas incentivizing landlords to accept vouchers. There was a story recently in the Providence Journal, if folks didn't see it, about how there are folks that have rental assistance and are unable to use it because they can't find an apartment where the landlord will accept it or where that they can afford because the housing prices are so crazy right now. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for these resources to be addressed, to be used to help address those problems. And I hope that the city council will do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gianna Pacheco.
Good evening, Gianna. The floor is yours. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gianna Pacheco, and I live at 16 Cavalry Street in Cranston. I want to express support for using a portion of the ARPA funding for affordable housing development and housing assistance. As Cranston falls well below the threshold required by the state for affordable housing, it should be reminded that all of us here are just one unexpected life event away from being housing insecure, whether that be from separation from a spouse or a significant other, losing a job, unexpected medical bills or legal fees, whereas people are now experiencing the effects of a 2-year pandemic, making an already difficult situation worse for those who are struggling. All of you had an opportunity to stand for housing at the most recent council meeting, and most of you denied it. Regardless of whether you think that specific piece of land was appropriate or not, where exactly would the right place be to build more housing? There was at least another proposal for housing development back in November, I believe, which was rejected as well. All of you have acknowledged that there is a housing problem that needs to be addressed, so I'm asking you to do something about it. Previous proposals may have had issues with their location, but it's time to figure it out. This money was granted to the city to ease the economic impacts of the pandemic, and not being able to find an affordable place to live and isolate if necessary is a pretty big problem. So while there are many great ways that ARPA funds can benefit the city, housing development and assistance needs to be one of the priorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pauline DeRosa.
Good evening, Pauline. Name and address for the record, please.
Pauline DeRosa, 97 Cypress Drive. Good evening, Council President, Council members, and thank you, Mr. DeMayo, for your very explicit presentation this evening. I just have one question before I make a few statements. As this distribution continues through 2026 of the ARPA funds, where and how will the public be notified of these distributions, and what entities or public bodies will be receiving those monies? I'm not going to belabor the affordable housing issue, as it already has been explained very succinctly by several previous speakers. We just need to know that everyone needs a decent place to live, and we need to increase the supply of houses needed to meet that goal. Secondly, we need to have a people-first approach in economic development in the city, an investment in growing our economy and enhancing the prosperity and quality of life for all residents without intruding on and restricting residential neighborhoods. Thirdly, increasing green space within the city's boundaries. We are a state that includes accessible natural resources. Create public plazas, if you will, places with trees, green grass, benches, a place for meeting and socializing among residents. This would include the City of Cranston Tree Program. The Garden City Alliance, of which I am the founder, endorses the West Bay Land Trust request for the additional funding of $10,000 for the expansion of the Cranston Neighborhood Planting Project. Without going into the numerous positive aspects of planting trees, studies show that trees boost happiness and reduce stress levels, as well as creating more livable space and preventing soil erosion. Pollution is another aspect of what we might spend some of this money on. We must be good stewards of the environment by fighting and eliminating pollution. Also, I'd like to bring up flood mitigation. In March 2010, the city of Cranston, along with parts of Warwick, experienced a 100-year flood. Many homes were inundated with flood water to the point of making their homes unlivable. The city needs to be proactive in improving drainage in flood-prone areas and insist in providing disaster relief to those who reside in those areas. I'd like to see some money go to funding all departments and commissions of the city to allow them to provide hybrid meetings. As we struggle with a pandemic, we cannot exclude residents who may not be able to engage in in-person meetings. I would also like to say, lastly, that I don't believe that, well, actually, we don't believe that school funding should be a part of these funds. We have all provided the school committee and the school department with millions of dollars over the past years. And some of us are being taxed for this, or all of us are being taxed for this. So at this time, I think they have had an influx of millions of dollars in the past. And I think that we should consider not providing more monies if at all possible.
Mr.
That
Rosa,
may
we're-
be a popular statement, but thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Martha DeMille.
Good evening, Martha. Welcome. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, this is Martha DeMeo, and I live at 69 Laconia Road. I have a question about funding for construction. To mitigate the mass shooting-like environment the students and residents of Mechanic experience on a daily basis, the mayor has committed to seeking ARPA funds to build an indoor shooting range at the location on Phoenix Avenue. Mr. DeMeo, do you see that falling within the guidelines?
Martha, we'll have to get an answer for you for that for the next meeting. Just because he's writing down all the questions, he's going to try to get answers for everybody for the next meeting. But you still have 4 minutes if you'd like to ask more.
Well, I just just for the record, a background, we now have military grade weapons being shot off across from schools. And the mayor has come a long way to acknowledge that that's unacceptable and that he wants to change it. So as you know, Chris, that's a big accomplishment, right? So something has to be done. And if in fact the opera funds are not suitable, which it doesn't seem they are, I would like to ask everyone in the city council to take up this issue. It hasn't stopped. It was supposed to stop in December and then commence again in March. So it hasn't stopped, and we can't live through another year of mass shooting like sounds. That's all I have to say. I guess, does anyone want to comment? I know I've spoken to a number of council people here tonight on this issue.
Thank you, Martha. I think your internet connection is pretty bad. You were cutting in and out there, but I think we got the gist of you'd like opera funds to be used to build a indoor police range.
No. Let me be very clear on this. I do not want opera. I'm not saying opera funds should be built to build a gun facility, a shooting facility. The mayor committed to requesting that.
Okay.
To alleviate the
I
problem.
apologize. Your internet, it's either your internet or my internet's cutting out. I apologize.
Well, okay, so I want to say it one more time. I'm asking if the mayor's commitment to use opera funds is within the guidelines set forth by the federal government. Did you hear that?
I did, and we'll get an answer for the next meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Annette Bourne.
Hi, Annette, the floor is yours. Name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. Annette Bourne, 51 Community Drive. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the use of these once-in-a-lifetime recovery funds available to our city to ameliorate the devastation of COVID-19. Foremost among those needs related to health is housing. As pointed out in numerous studies, where we live is more impactful than our genetics in terms of our health. As such, I am proposing a substantial portion of the remaining ARPA funds to be used for our city's housing needs, both healthy housing grants and loans, as well as a capital program for the development of long-term affordable homes. In support of this proposal, I have assembled a few facts gathered from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey. There are 12,295 Cranston households that fall below 80% of HUD's median income. For a household of 3, this would be a maximum of $62,300. There are nearly 6,000 Cranston homeowner households that pay more than 30% of their income for housing, qualifying them as cost burdened. There are more than 4,500 Cranston renter households that are cost burdened. There are more than 23,000 housing units across the city that were built prior to 1980, possibly exposing small children to lead paint. Of those older housing units, more than 8,500 were built prior to 1939, likely in need of any number of healthy housing improvements, ranging from safety and accessibility to energy efficiencies. Beyond these facts from the census data, Rhode Island Housing and Housing Works have analyzed production of long-term affordable homes over the last 10 years and note that Cranston has not developed any. It is also one of only 5 Rhode Island municipalities that has not availed themselves of the state's housing bond known as Building Homes Rhode Island. The other 4 municipalities, though, are quite unlike ours: Foster, Gloucester, Situate, and West Greenwich. Currently, our city falls nearly 1,500 homes short of the goal of 10% long-term affordable homes. As the state's second largest city, we should be seen as a leader and example of providing healthy, affordable homes to our residents and those who would seek to make Cranston their home. These ARPA funds used wisely give us the opportunity to fulfill that role and be a model for the state and the region. Thank you for this time to speak.
Thank you.
Sarah Lee.
Good evening, former council member Lee. Welcome back. And the floor is yours. Name and address for the record. Sarah, can you hear us? We can't hear you unless I'm having audio trouble.
Oh,
We could just hear you. We heard you for a second.
is this better? I unmuted.
We can hear you now. The floor is yours.
Okay. So I'm just requesting to use some of the ARPA funds to increase the allotment that the city pays towards the Cranston neighborhood tree planting program. Right as of yet, they allot $10,000, which used to pay for 40 trees when the program was set up, and now it pays for maybe a little bit more than 20. So, and I just think that if you're trying to prepare for the next pandemic, it's great to increase the enjoyment of the outside, and trees help to do that. They shade the sidewalks and cool down the neighborhoods in the summer. So I think that they are important for our mental well-being as we need to get outside to socialize. So I just hope you'll consider increasing the funds for this important program, which helps to replace the street trees that the city often has to take down. And I also urge you to, I'm listening to people asking for increased affordable housing, and I just caution that when I was on the council, I remember a lot of people complaining that their basements were flooding because of the development in their neighborhood. Like they didn't have houses next door, and now they do. And then their basement that never flooded for 15 years, all of a sudden is starting to flood. So all the increased development will raise the level of the groundwater and increase flooding in existing housing. So just to be conscious of cutting down trees for new development, because the trees really do help to absorb a lot of that excess runoff as we have increased storms. So I guess that's it. I think there are probably some other people on the call who are going to talk about the Cranston neighborhood tree planting program and as well. So I just want to keep it short. Thank you.
Sounds good. Sarah, just need your address for the record. I think you were cutting out in the beginning.
Oh, okay. It's 1330 Narragansett Boulevard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Steve Frias.
Steve, thank you for joining us. Name and address for the record, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Steve Frias, 107 Garden Hills Drive, and I speak for no one but myself. So I know I sent out comments to you, written comments to the council members for some ideas about how to spend some of this ARPA money. And I know, hopefully you guys had the time to read it, but I know you were busy, so I'll just give a quick overview. Number one, obviously this money can be used for revenue losses. And because the way the federal government calculates revenue losses rather generously, you could try to hold the line on taxes for the next few years with this money, which would benefit most would benefit, of course, the entire city, and I think would be very popular. What I also would like to add, though, is to make sure you don't get too dependent on APRA funds for your operating expenses. In the 1970s, we got a whole influx of federal money, and we used it for our operating expenses. And then when the well started running dry, we ended up with double-digit tax increases in the late 1970s. So please sure to limit how much money you do use for your operating expenses, for recurring operating expenses for APRA. I know last year you used about 8 million of it almost to hold the line on taxes, but be careful how much you do use. I know people do not want to have a dramatic tax increase come year 2025. The APRA funds can't be used to pay off debt. They can't be used to pay down the pension fund liability, but there's no prohibition, by the way, on OPEB, which is basically retiree healthcare. And back in the pandemic year of 2020, we didn't fully fund our OPEB for our retirees, for healthcare for police and fire. So I believe under the revenue loss category, the way I calculate it, you could use some money for OPEB and reduce our unfunded liability there. So that's something that would, I think, benefit our firefighters, our police, and our fiscal health. Because one of the goals of APRA is to make sure we stay fiscally healthy through the pandemic. Helping certain businesses. One thing I think that would be nice is for the restaurants of Cranston who paid liquor licenses for those 2 years during the pandemic to get some money back for those liquor licenses. For a whole year, they basically really couldn't operate. So giving people who, couldn't operate fully. And so I think that if you gave them $2,000 to reimburse them for the time that they had a liquor license, but couldn't fully utilize it because of public health restrictions, I think would be a nice way to help these restaurants. A lot of discussion about affordable housing, and I do believe it should be used for affordable housing, some of this money. A couple of things. Under state law, there's a goal of 10%. That's really not feasible to have a 10%. I mean, we do not build enough homes and houses in this city to ever get to 10% in any time in the near future. There is another goal in the state law, which we and 6 other cities and towns meet, which is 15% of your apartments are affordable housing, and you have at least a quarter of your city being apartments. We should be building on that. And I came up with a couple ideas of how to do that. One is have the city sell surplus land that we do have to develop affordable housing developers, and to help them pay for it, because we have to, under the charter, they have to be 90% of assessed value, use some of the money from APRA to fund that as a grant program. Another one is to basically reach out to our current apartment homeowners and see if we can create a grant program to have them convert some of their existing apartments to affordable. Use the APRA funds for that. So you'd expand the number of apartments that are affordable. Wrapping this up.
You just reached 4 minutes if you want to start wrapping up.
Wrapping up real quick, stormwater drainage. And lastly, I know you guys don't deal with the schools directly, but please tell the schools to use the money to deal with learning loss. All the kids were hurt by this year out of school. Sorry for taking up so much time, and good luck, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Frias.
Jeff Gale.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Jeff Gale. I live at 44 Payne Avenue. I'd like to talk to the council tonight about supporting childcare programs in Cranston with the ARPA funds. According to exceed.ri.gov, there are 93 childcare programs in the city, which frankly surprised me when I saw that. As we all know, childcare programs are very expensive to families. What you may not know is that childcare programs in the state are struggling with the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had conversations with Leanne Barrett of Rhode Island Kids Count and Lisa Hildebrand at the Rhode Island Association for the Education of Young Children about this situation. They said that the programs are struggling to keep the doors open due to staffing shortages, which has led to enormous waiting lists for parents. Providing funding for these programs for both center and home-based would help these programs and Cranston families immensely. This could be in the form of grants to cover operating costs or providing sign-on bonuses to hire new staff. Another opportunity is to provide grants for facility improvements such as furniture and outdoor materials, which will then free up revenue for the centers to perhaps pay their staff more or to use on other needed things. And I believe that Providence has already done two rounds of grants for facility improvements. So there's something we can work with there. We should also consider giving grants directly to parents to pay for childcare. This would relieve a financial burden on families while making sure that children can attend high quality programs. I strongly urge the council to consider childcare in Cranston when making funding decisions for ARPA funds. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to put you in touch with both Leanna and Lisa at Rhode Island Kids Count and Rhode Island AUIC to help you with this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gale.
Steve Stikos.
Mr. Stikos, welcome back, former councilman, and name and address for the record. The floor is yours, sir.
Steve Stikos, 37 Ferncrest Avenue. I'd like to speak on two relatively small issues, but I think very important. The first is the Cranston Neighborhood Tree Planting Program, which the city currently allocates $10,000 a year towards, and we're asking that be doubled to $20,000 a year. The reason for that is, as Sarah Lee said, that the cost of trees has gone up. In 2015, which was the first year of the program was able to get 38 trees, and this year we're down to 26. So it would, and there are also slightly smaller trees that we're planting. So I think the benefits of trees have been covered, but this program has planted about 250 trees in the city since it started in 2015. And when we planted the 200th tree, Mayor Fung, one of the things that he said was he thought that the program should be expanded. So I hope you'll consider that. The second issue has to do with housing, and it has to do with lead poisoning. The first thing I had to say, I'm sorry, is supported by the West Bay Land Trust. This issue is just something that I personally feel strongly about. But we still have kids in Cranston getting lead poisoned, and the Department of Health states on its website that the, I'll quote here, the most prevalent exposure to Rhode Island comes from lead-based paint and paint dust found in residences built before 1978. So this is an issue that my recommendation is that the city pay for an additional person in the Department of Inspections in order to pursue the lead problem. The state law says that to rent an apartment built before 1978, you have to have a lead safe certificate. And what this extra person would do, in my opinion, is go through the apartments in the city and make sure that the owners can produce a lead safe certificate. And obviously, if they can't, they would then have to improve their apartments and make them lead safe before they were rentable. Now, when I was on the council, I raised this issue, and the response from the inspections department was the Department of Health enforces that. That is not correct. The requirement for a lead safe apartment is in the part of the housing code, which the city is supposed to administer and enforce. That's not happening. They're not requiring people to have lead safe permits or certifications. So I would suggest someone be hired by the city to make sure every apartment has one, and that anybody who has an apartment and comes in to the building department for a permit to alter an apartment, that they be required to produce that lead safe certificate before they get a building permit. So I think these are, that's an easy problem for the city to solve, but we need somebody to go after it. And frankly, the current building inspector was not interested in
Steve, just
doing
want to
that.
let you know you're at 4 minutes.
Okay, I'll just say that we're in the last numbers that came out in 2019, 26 Cranston kids entered kindergarten lead poisoned. And that puts big pressures on the schools because even a small amount of lead, according to the health department, causes brain damage and learning disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to hear from you.
Donna Childs.
Good evening, Donna. Name and address for the record, please, and welcome.
Yes, good evening. My name is Donna Childs. I live at 22 Hyde Street in Cranston, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. I was very glad to hear that part of the intention of these funds is to prepare for the next pandemic. I've been saddened that we had failed to prepare for the last one. I'm actually experienced in dealing with pandemics. Prior to launching my business, I was a senior executive of the Swiss Reinsurance Group, which was actually mentioned in another context by one of the witnesses speaking about another matter on broadband. Swiss Re is the world's largest reinsurer of property, casualty, and life health risks. And so we reinsure morbidity and mortality experience. And so I have been involved in managing SARS in Southeast Asia and Ebola in Sub-Saharan Africa. When our Asian clients rescinded our travel authorization in the fourth quarter of 2019 for COVID, we attempted without success to persuade the state government that we needed to do very specific things to prepare small businesses for the pandemic. They were not receptive to that argument. We now know that they hired out-of-state consultants, the Boston Consulting Group, under terms that are not consistent with federal guidelines. I'm now filing a protest over that. But I just want to share with you a couple specific things that we could do differently the next time. Suggest that we consider such a program for this funding and ask how I could submit specific ideas for your written ideas for your review. One of the key issues that's come up about the pandemic is the topic of business interruption insurance. And people have asserted that business interruption insurance doesn't pay for pandemic-related losses. It's not entirely true. In certain instances, it will. For example, my former employer and current client, Swiss Re, paid $400 million to the organizers of the Tokyo Olympics. If you structure the cover as event cancellation, you can indemnify some of those losses. What that means is that our restaurants and hotels that served event patrons, whether they're coming to the Providence Convention Center for trade shows, or they're going to be dining out because they're going to the jazz festival, those losses on those meals, which you can estimate looking at your prior year's earnings, would have been covered by insurance if we had appropriate measures in place, which we could have done at negligible cost. So I hope that we'll be sort of forward thinking to make sure this doesn't happen again, because it's not just about the pandemic. The next hurricane, the next flood, the next disruption could also be economically ruinous to small businesses, and it doesn't have to be. There are things that we can and should do to prepare for that. So thank you for listening to my remarks, and I welcome your feedback as to how I can submit a written concept note for your consideration.
Thank you.
Ariana Kuna.
Just want to let the record show that Councilman Matthew Riley is here as well. Welcome, and name and address for the record. And you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hello, my name is Ariana and my address is 60 Lockwood Street. in Cranston. My name is Ariana, and I am Hub Coordinator of Sunrise Rhode Island Youth. We are an organization of over 200 high school and middle school students, mostly located here in Cranston. Today, I'm here with one major concern, the growing homelessness crisis in our city. 72 children in this district have been identified as homeless. This is despicable. Just 1 month ago, I spent one single night outside as part of Sleep Out Rhode Island protesting homelessness, and the next day, school was unsurprisingly difficult. It is impossible to learn when your environment is uncertain. Thus, it is imperative that these families are a priority for ARPA funding. It has been made clear tonight that this money is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So let's take a second to close our eyes and dream of the best possible city we could create. I dream of a city where I buy my vegetables at the local farmers market and all my peers have homes to go back to. I dream of a world where everyone in this city is making a livable wage and a world where I get to make welcome cookies for all the new neighbors that just moved into the affordable homes that were built at the end of my street. We have the money to make all these dreams a reality. We have the money to make sure everyone in this city has what they need to be successful. Do you want to be the council people who questioned if they were able to spend the money in time? Or do you want to be the council people that created a livable city? My question for you tonight is, how big will you dream? Thank you for the time, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thank you very much.
Jason Case.
Jason, good evening. Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. Jason Case, 47 Lark Avenue. I want to begin by first off thanking the council for hosting this event tonight and providing the information that I think is very important in the decisions that we make going forward. Also want to thank Mr. DeMeo for, again, laying out that slide deck. It was very informative. A couple of quick questions here for the council. We obviously have allocated some of the ARPA money towards revenue losses. Is that a one-time allocation, or God forbid, if this pandemic goes on another year or more years, can that be applied to future years? Certainly you can't get back to me tonight, but that's a question I am interested in. Second of all, what we do know from the pandemic is that the people who suffered the worst from it in terms of physically and health are those that had a lot of health issues. Can any of that money be applied towards proactive health initiatives that help these individuals get down their comorbidities? The statistics show that the average death is 4+ comorbidities. I think we can all agree in the old saying there, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Again, can some of that money be applied towards initiatives that promote better health, better living within the community? So God forbid, if we were to have to deal with a situation like this again, we can hopefully have a better, healthier population to fight that. And that is all I have. Thank you again, council. Do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Christina Brown.
Good evening. My name is Christina Brown. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome. And name and address for the record, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Council President. My name is Christina Brown. My address is 217 Armington Street. I know we're running out of time, so I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I do hope that a significant investment of these funds is made into safe and affordable housing in our city. Addressing the housing supply, stability, and safety concerns throughout the entire city is something that is so critical to a resilient future. We know, and there's tons of literature, that you can't stabilize your health, your education outcomes, or your economic prosperity or mobility if you don't have a safe, affordable place to live. Many of the people on the call have already talked about several aspects of what we could do with these funds, but I also want to highlight and add for the record immediate supports and services to families and individuals experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity, including things like eviction diversion, food and basic needs, and access to temporary shelter. But I do want to see a substantial investment made in the development of new housing. New housing construction, affordable housing specifically, is very resilient and moves us forward on both energy and land use and density, and provides us housing options across the lifespan. We know we have an aging population, and we know that many large homes are inhabited by our aging residents who want to age in place. Many of those aging residents can't keep up with the costs of maintaining those old homes. And if we had safe, affordable houses that were accessible for them to downsize in, we would continue to maintain an equilibrium in our housing market. Affordable housing and the development of new affordable housing is critical, not only to resiliency now and addressing the immediate needs, but making our communities more resilient for the future. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much. If there is anyone else that would like to participate in public comment that hasn't already spoken, please raise your hand. This will be the last chance for this evening's public comment. Tom, are there any hands up?
I'm seeing no further public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. To all those that, we do have, oh no, I think that person already spoke. So yep, we are clear. I want to thank everybody on behalf of the entire council that took the time to join us this evening and speak and advocate for what you think the money should be spent on. Ask some great questions. We certainly appreciate that. There will be a follow-up meeting on February 10th at 6 o'clock. We don't know if it's going to be just Zoom. If we're in person, it'll be in person and on Zoom, or just Zoom. We need to see what the governor's order does with that. And then will also be public comment allowed at the February 10th meeting. Any questions from council members before I adjourn? I see none. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? There being none, thank you very much. Have a great
Nice
evening.
job, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, guys.